Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we continue to deepen our awareness and exploration into the domain of apology and reconciliation, reparations, and healing that we began in January, as we consider how human consciousness can be elevated through a process of simply recognizing what we've done to each other, what we've done to our bodies, and what we've done to the earth. So this week, we're going to delve into a series of stories today from the Cheyenne-Arapaho Tribe of North America. And over the next couple of days, we'll be delving into survival stories of the Holocaust that the Jewish people endured in Germany. And we'll also be talking about the phenomenon of the inner colonizer. And then next week, we will be hosting a 5-day summit on the war in Ukraine. It's an extraordinary thing to consider as we look around the world that almost every day there's some kind of news of either a toxic chemical spill or more war or conflict or some kind of escalating turbulence in the ecosystem. And so how we as individuals and how we as a community, as the Humanity Rising community with viewers from over 130 countries around the world, how do we understand what's happening? How do we navigate in an empowered way through the unfolding world events is the critical issue that we at Humanity Rising seek to explore as we go day by day and consider world events, but look at them from the vantage point of ruthless realism, but always with a view of how do we take whatever crisis is confronting us, either from the past or the present, and transform it into an opportunity for renewal. And that's Humanity Rising. One of the ways that we do that, as you all know who watch our programs, is that we begin each program by just simply breathing together. So for those of you who are new, in a moment, we'll put up an art card. You'll hear the sound of the bell. And when you hear the sound of the bell, just breathe in very, very slowly for about 5.5 seconds. You'll hear another bell and just breathe out for about 5.5 seconds. We're going to take 10 breaths together. And when we finish, everyone will feel a lot better and will feel more coherent within ourselves and within our community. So thank you, everyone. Let us breathe together. Thank you, everyone. I think we had a little glitch with the sound, but I hope everyone just kept breathing. It's always good under any and all circumstances to breathe as one. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to all of you Dr. Henrietta Mann, who's a full-blooded Cherokee, Cheyenne, enrolled with the Cheyenne-Arapaho Tribes of Oklahoma. She's retired as the Endowed Chair of Native American Studies at Montana State University in Bozeman, wherein she also taught at the University of Montana in Missoula for 28 years, as well as lectured and taught at other universities, including UC Berkeley, Harvard University, and other educational institutions. Additionally, Dr. Mann served as director of the Office of Indian Educational Programs and was deputy to the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And she was the national coordinator of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act Coalition for the Association of American Indian Affairs. She's deeply immersed, as you can see, in Native American studies and culture. And she agreed to come on our program as part of our overall thematic around apology and reparations to talk about her own story as a Cheyenne-Arapaho and what her tribe went through, but more broadly to talk about the Native American experience from the point of view of education and culture, and how the Native Americans, through all the vicissitudes that they have been forced to endure, have maintained their connection with the richness of their spiritual traditions and past, and have emerged really as a shining light to the rest of the world for what's possible for Indigenous peoples to both experience, but also to bear witness to and illuminate for a larger world. So Henrietta, we welcome you to Humanity Rising. And so if you can turn your video on, we can begin our dialogue. There you go. So Henrietta, why don't we begin with you filling out your own personal story in any way that you would like. I know that you come from such an extraordinarily rich tradition, and we'll carry our dialogue from there. But start with anything you want to say about your own story, and then anything you want to draw to our attention about the history of your tribe.
Now ish. Oyster on that nice chisity. Now mo na amen now. Go Shiva Namshim mo na amen now. Now oyster. Abo. Snaivish. Nivishkahan. Pivot one. Thank you for that gracious introduction. I began, first of all, by telling you my Cheyenne name, which is Oyster Ona, and it means prayer cloth woman. If you happen to visit places like Bear Butte in South Dakota, or any sacred place to other of my relatives, you sometimes see bright strips of cloth tied to the branches of trees. You can see them on a fence line around Sand Creek in Colorado. I am named for those prayer cloths. I was named for my grandmother, whom I never knew, who walked to that blissful camp above in the stars when my father was but an infant of 7 or 9 months of age. So I carry that name with a great deal of responsibility and want to honor her in that way. My father was Horse Roads, and he was given the first name of my my Hanavicus between Tollyburg. And when he went to fight in World War II and came home, his name was changed to that of a grandfather, and he became Horse Rose. My mother is a woman. My great-grandmother, the one great-grandmother I knew is Wasta, white buffalo woman. She and I shared 4 beautiful and wonderful years together. I do not know exactly what she said to me, but I know it had to be filled with all things Cheyenne. And I'm only Cheyenne, although I am enrolled with the Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribes of Oklahoma. And she gave me the kind of cultural foundation that is so important to those of us as First Nations peoples, the first peoples of this land, to have that cultural foundation that was given to us at creation, which despite the kind of unfortunate experience that we have suffered and been subjected to by those who found our land and came here to live with us, who took it by many different means. So I honor my great-grandmother Woesta, who took my body as an infant and held me in much the same way that Indian men today use their pipes, and with my head pointed me to the southeast, to the southwest, to the northwest, and to the northeast points of the universe. She then pointed my head upwards and then laid me on earth, cushioning my tiny body with her hands. Thus, I was introduced to those powerful spirit beings that sit at the semi-cardinal directions of the universe. I was introduced as one of the people hearted alike, sometimes referred to as the beautiful people, the Cheyenne Nation, not just of Oklahoma, but of Montana. As a midwife, she was able to perform that ceremony. I do not know that it is still observed today. She put my feet on the road of life and must have asked that I be given a long life to do many things for which she prayed. And I'm entering the last years of being an octogenarian. In 2 years, I will be 90 years of age, and I hope to live long enough to see that. I am 88 years old today, and I have seen much as I have walked this road of life with the people to whom I belong, the Cheyenne people, and as a citizen of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations, as well as a citizen of this country that we as First Nations were first to love. Ironically, we were finally given citizenship in our own land in 1924, 10 years before I was born. We had been denied citizenship because by virtue of being born into an indigenous nation, we were not born in this country. Think of that for a moment. We who have lived on this land for thousands upon thousands of years were made citizens of our own land that we were first to love. Love today and will always love our grandmother or mother, the earth, in which we as a peoples are spiritually rooted. We belong to this earth. We belong to this land. We were planted here essentially by the great one, as much as a gardener or a farmer plants their flowers, their seedlings, whatnot. We were planted in this earth. So we are planted in this ground that we were first to love. And so we, as little children, had very fragile roots, and we were like tiny little plants. And as we walked around this earth road of life, our roots became stronger and deeper. And when we reached the time of being young people, we were like supple young willow branches who could be shaped by the teachings of our elders who learned our ways as a people, the time to be educated. And as we walked further on this earth road, we became like gigantic cottonwood trees with strong roots, with branches and leaves that protected the people as they walked through life. And it was a time to maintain your cultures, to make sure that your children maintained and learned their languages. And then finally, at about age 65, then you entered into the age of, as we call, wisdom. And that was when you began to teach everyone else within your nation as you were nearing the time to go back out that circle, to live in the stars with all of our ancestors that have ever lived there, who have ever walked on this land with us, who stand waiting to greet us when it is our time to return to that blissful place above. These were the teachings that I learned as a child and a young person from my great-grandmother, from my grandfather, from my father and mother, and aunts and uncles. I decided that I just loved this whole world of education. I wanted to learn all there is to learn about how we are to live in a good way with all peoples and all. And so at age 5, I was allowed and given permission by the Indian agent to go and enroll in school. He whispered to my mother that I was so young that I would get tired and that she could take me back out. They could take me. It wasn't until maybe I was in the 4th grade or so that I experienced my first case of discrimination. And the Indian children, they were Cheyenne children like me, were called out into the hall one by one. And when it was my turn to go out, I was horrified to realize that our teachers and the parents of some of my classmates and the school nurse were checking the heads of only the Cheyenne children for head lice. Are we the only peoples ever to have head lice? And so I didn't have any that day. But I got on the school bus, that big yellow car that I thought was the most beautiful car in the world, that took me to this place where I could learn about those peoples that came to live with us. And for the 3-mile ride to my point of departure, I sat there listening to taunts of dirty Indian, lousy Indian, dumb Indian, and other such words. And I just sat listening to these judgments about us as a people. I got off that bus and watched that yellow school bus depart. And it was only then that I decided to cry. I thought it was so unfair for only us Cheyenne children to be pulled out of our classrooms and our heads searched for life. That day, my grandfather decided to come to meet me, and I saw him walking down the railroad tracks that I walked to and from the school bus. And I started crying, and he cried. As he was hollering, he ran, I ran. And I threw myself into his arms as only a wounded grandchild would do to her beloved grandfather. We walked on home together, and then he listened to me and said, my childhood name, what are you going to do about that? I said, I'm going to become a teacher, and I'm going to teach about us and the beauty of our ways. That was at about the age of 9 years of age. And I became a teacher. I became an educator. That negative situation pushed me in the direction of wanting to tell the stories of the beauty of what it is to be one of the first peoples of this land and to teach others about us. And I did that. I taught in the junior high and high school, and kept moving up, and finally decided and heard of Native American studies programs on the West Coast in about 1969, 70, and 70 when I graduated with a master's degree from Oklahoma State University. And Native American studies, that was where I had to be. Was where I wanted to be. And I got a job teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, in Native American Studies, a place that acknowledged our beloved grandparents who gave us life, to acknowledge and learn about our cultures and our languages, our respective identities and homelands as the beloved First Nations of this magnificent land. I sit here in my recliner a lot and watch television, ascertain for myself what is going on in this big world out there. I hear much about the Congress. I hear much of what is going on there, and I say, oh my gosh, they should come and learn from some of our elders what it is to be adult and truly be concerned about the people that they represent. And I know there is a great deal that needs to be rectified with our brothers from the Black direction. I hear and wondered about spy balloons from the people of the yellow direction of the land, and what is in that balloon and why. And then I don't have to wonder about those who come to us from the direction, the white people, because I have learned a great deal about how they are and who they are in terms of contact. And so we come out of cultures that have strong value systems that continue to exist today. And I remember the teachings of the Cheyenne people about this one good Cheyenne man who was selected by the Great One to go and be taught by all of the spirit powers of the world within our sacred mountain, which sits on the periphery of the Black Hills in South Dakota, to learn all it that had to be taught about how we are to be as Cheyenne people. Our traditional government, the Council of 44, peace chiefs, peace chiefs. Bill, peace chiefs. That man also came back and established our military society, making sure that there was a distinction between those that rule and govern and those that protect and provide. And then we were given our value systems. We were told how we were to be. Our teaching came from the land. Not are we just rooted in the land, but we come from the land. Land that seemed to be the basis for the mistreatment of the people that love this land, loved it first, and will always love it. We place a high value upon this land because we know that we are rooted in this land or this earth. And we know that something happened in the year of 1492. That man was lost and thought he was in a whole different area on earth, but he had come to the western, to this hemisphere. Was greeted in a very kind way, a good way, by the people on that island that he visited. And thinking that he had landed in the Indies, called us Indios, Los Indios, which has been translated to Indians. And not only was our land discovered, so to speak, how do you discover something that has been peopled by millions of individuals for all time? I think the word discovery is a little bit different from my version of what it is or should have been. And so, land. This is true. A lot of, in 1493, the Pope of that time issued a directive, a papal bull, a year later in 1493. And this spells out the doctrine of discovery. And what it did was to allow those nations from Europe of that time, if they would sailed out to claim these lands that they discovered for themselves by either planting a flag, building some buildings, erecting some buildings, or whatever. But this is the doctrine of discovery. And this sets for Christian conversion and enslavement in the Americas, in this part of the world. Furthermore, it is also the basis for manifest destiny and expansion into our country. Manifest destiny is alive and well today. And so it also sets forth the building blocks of white supremacy and manifest destiny, the discovery doctrines that legacy lives on. The thing about it is that we, as the indigenous peoples of this land, were viewed as obstacles. Those people who were destined to take ownership of this land from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And as obstacles, we had to be eliminated. But that kind of elimination began, I would say, virtually at contact or at contact. And I am disheartened when I read about the kind of mistreatment of my relatives on the East Coast, particularly Pequot Indians. A village of about 700 Pequots was burned. And Cotton Mather exclaimed that day that the whole world could rejoice because that day they had sent 600 heathen souls to hell. A massacre. Heathen. You know, the doctrine of discovery also gave those that found or came to other lands and were not Christian the right to own that land. They were not Christian. We were not Christian. But we were then highly spiritual people. Today, we still continue to observe our ceremonies that were given to us over time. Teachings that not only came out of sacred Bear Butte in South Dakota, but from a mountain that looked black with trees far to the east. That is referred to as a black mountain. And out of that mountain came our female, highest ceremony among the Cheyenne people, the one Haya, or the Hokwiham. We know it in English as the sun dance. I went to the Anglo-American institutions and because of my love of learning and miraculously completed a Doctor of Philosophy degree in American Studies, the closest I could come to studying about the people to whom I belong. They are not my people. I belong to them as one of the ceremonial women. A Sundance woman, and the last time I went into ceremony was when I was 82 years of age, 6 years ago. And one of the Sundance leaders introduced me to my younger relatives as the oldest Sundancer in both the North and the South. I learned about who I was as a child and as I was growing up. But there comes a time when one has to know more to maintain those connections to identity and to continue to live the life of service that I am sure my great-grandmother, White Buffalo Woman, set me on. And it is through such ceremonies that we continue to renew the world, all peoples, all life, from the tiniest of plants to the celestial beings, the sun, the moon, the stars, to renew this earth that humankind has not treated as kindly and respectfully as we should. So there are those of our community as Cheyenne people who sit and maintain their old traditions of renewing the earth. The sun dance was outlawed by the United States federal government in the 1890s, as were many of the other ceremonies of our relatives across this continent. And so, how can I describe without feeling emotions the kind of the result of manifest destiny here and how we were mistreated, how we were killed, but to take all of our grandmother, our mother, the earth. When I taught at higher education, I had some of my students, so I had wonderful questions that forced me to think. But I think the one that I really had to calm myself down about was a statement made when I lived in Montana and taught at the University of Montana. A student making a comment, we're talking about the reservation system, and this student said, "What more do you want as Indian people? After all, we gave you reservations." Who gave us reservations? Who gave them land? Who took that land from us? And there were those students in the room said, "Well, all Indians get a free education and all of you get health care from the public health service. And we gave you reservations." What we need to understand and remind ourselves is that Indian education and Indian health services is nothing more than an exchange for land that was taken primarily through treaties, all of which were broken and have been broken. Anglo-Europeans arrived here after 1492, after 1620, and they took about 1.5 billion, that's with a B, 1.5 billion acres of native land, which is virtually an entire continent that has a total land area of 1.9 billion acres. Add to that the 640 million acres the federal government owns. And today, only about 56 million acres are held in trust for American Indians by the United States federal government, which acts as a trustee and makes all land use decisions. Those so-called reservations of that student of mine said that were given to us by the first immigrants that came to this country. Land. Long ago, when that good Cheyenne man came back out of Bear Butte, carrying with him the Cheyenne ways, and who lived with us for 4 long lives of a person. And as he was leaving, told us, he said, one of these days in the future, he said, and I hate to say this, he said, you are going to come to a people, those people are going to come from the east, the direction from which the sun rises. And they are going to bring strange things with them. They're going to be dressed differently than you do. They're going to be dressed in tight kind of clothing like they've been put in a sack. They're going to be inflexible. He said, and they will bring with them many different strange things, like a gun, a long stick that speaks with a voice of thunder, and they are going to take that stick and they're going to kill off all of the animals upon which you depend, and they are going to kill you also with that long stick that speaks with the voice of thunder. Came true. And it's very real today. When, as a nation, we are concerned about the matter of banning guns, gun control, that the people that represent us in Washington, as we call Washington, need to really pick up. And I cry with those that experience the kind of death in these mass shootings that seem to occur every day. I know what it is to suffer that kind of human loss, because my ancestors one of our listed among our many values are love and respect and compassion and understanding. That this good man brought us from out of that sacred mountain. He told us that these people that would come to us would bring us something that looked like sand, but would taste very sweet. And he said that there would be many different ways and different diseases that they would carry with them. What I've heard, they said they will carry the diseases on their legs. I don't know why they, but it's a part of the prophecies of this good Cheyenne man. Those diseases. And we were to avoid contact with them. And history oftentimes refers to the Cheyenne people as kites, those kites that we sometimes fly in the wind, because it seemed to those early Anglo-Europeans that we were always fleeing in a different direction. We did not want to be close enough here and be killed by those sticks that speak with a voice of thunder. We did not want to be subjected to the illnesses that they would carry with them. And this man also told us, he said, they will want the land. He said, especially that gold medal that the Great One put on earth in many places. He said, that gold medal that makes them crazy. He said, and finally, they will ask you for your children, and you must say no. He said, because they will take and educate them, and they will educate them, and they will know nothing about who they are as Cheyennes. And so that day came. We do not know what the population of this land, of this land's first peoples was. And I have seen population estimates clear up to 16 million. But Russell Thornton, in his book, American Indian Holocaust and Survival, published in 1987, estimates that the American Indian population here in the United States, 48 states, decreased from over 5 million in 1492. We don't know, we didn't take census. And they decreased to about 250,000 in the decade from 1890 to 1900. We, as First Nations peoples, the original peoples of this land, were included finally in the federal census in 1890, and by that time, our population was 250,000. Even if we look at the adjusted population figures of 5 million plus. We were all nearly destroyed. And indeed, those people that came carried new diseases. And they were not limited to smallpox, measles, cholera, and whooping cough. They brought with them the diseases that resulted in 93 epidemics and pandemics among American Indians from 1520 to 1900. 93 epidemics. And we today are still reeling from that one pandemic, COVID-19. The first of these epidemics was smallpox. In fact, a man named Jeffrey Amherst had made the suggestion that they infect some of the blankets given to Indians with smallpox. ultimately, I hope we learn that we don't accept blankets anymore. And so they brought those epidemics. They brought that gun that speaks with the voice, that big stick that speaks with the voice of thunder. They burned at Pequot Village. There were other skirmishes in that area, many massacres. Never mind that those same people helped get them through that first and brutal winter, resulted in their celebration of having survived that winter that we now call Thanksgiving. And although we had been warned to avoid contact with these strangers, they implemented their expansionist doctrine of manifest destiny just to get to that again. And immigrants traveled west to seek their fortunes, especially after gold was discovered, that yellow metal that the Great One put on Earth in many places. That gold was discovered in California in 1849. And they traveled west on the overland trail in large immigrant wagon trains and came into contact with tribes. Unfortunately, some in those immigrant trains, or some of the immigrant trains and the immigrants within them, carried cholera. And they transmitted to the Cheyennes as they came across the high northern plains. And some of the Cheyennes fled, but in many instances, entire encampments were left standing in which lay their dead men, women, and children who had perished from what we call the big cramps. And the old people say that as many as 50% of the Cheyenne population was decimated by cholera. Cholera, of course, had exacted its toll on non-Indians as well. The Irish carried it on the immigrant boats that left England, crossing the Atlantic to New York, which was then carried to St. Louis, the gateway to the West. And tragically, these immigrants contaminated the water and people as they crossed our lands. Diseases. And we know what it is to suffer the loss of our beloved ones through epidemics. We have experienced that in the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there are many massacres that we can name. There was the Bear River Massacre of the Northern Shoshone, which occurred near Preston, Idaho. And around that time, as this land was being settled from the east to the west, we were involved in a civil war. And not many people know about this massacre, the Bear River Massacre of the Northern Shoshone, because it occurred during the Civil War. And the Mormon settlers have been taking progressively more land from the, I'll just go on, Hamawostanil. This is our word, Cheyenne word, for the simple, ordinary people of this land. It means the indigenous people. And so the Mormons have been appropriating more of their territory. And so the Shoshone people, the northern Shoshone people, saw themselves in the crosshairs of those sticks that speak with a voice of thunder, under the leadership of a Colonel Patrick Connor and 200 California volunteers, who said that they were going to take no prisoners. And finally, at daybreak on January 29th, 1863, the soldiers attacked, brutally killing nearly 250 Native Americans. They raped any woman who hadn't been killed, used axes to crush the skulls of the wounded, and set fire to all the lodges. All we have to do is listen to what is going on in Ukraine to see that women continue to be raped by the aggressor, that those weapons continue to be used. Many, as we know, have been tortured. Civilians, but little children, innocent children, our beloved children, our future, the future of the people from Ukraine. Massacres, unfortunately, do not seem to be a thing of the past. Oklahoma people were massacred in the Yontucket massacre. In, I guess, what we might call wars of extermination. Then the Blackfeet encountered at Mariah's Pass on January 23rd, 1870, where Colonel Eugene Baker, who was sent actually to pacify a so-called rebellious band of Blackfeet tribes. We're always the rebels. We're always the aggressor. We're always the ones that are placed on the other side of good. And yet we're good. We're good-hearted, loving people. And Colonel Baker attacked the camp of a man called Heavy Runner. And by the time it was over, there were about 313 massacred Blackfeet under the leadership of the Heavy Runner. And most of them, not all of them, had smallpox. The story goes on and on. And in 1876, we know what happened to a man by the last name of Custer, George Armstrong Custer. And we call him Titstai in our language, long-hair Custer. And we know that he and his command were wiped out at the Little Bighorn. Where long-hair Custer was wiped out. It means for us to wipe out. We had many instances of first people when we were wiped out. And then after that victorious battle of the Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, and the Northern Arapaho, we were hunted to the death. And in 1890, we hear of this massacre at Wounded Knee Creek near Pine Ridge, on the Pine Ridge Reservation, in which Bigfoot and his band were murdered by some of the soldiers who were with the reconstituted Summer Cavalry. Blackfoot was ill. He had pneumonia. But the soldiers, nonetheless, they say that the poor deaf young man had hidden a rifle under his blanket, and when they were asked to give up their weapons, he had hidden it. So the story goes. And he had paid a lot of money for it, so they say, and it went off. And the shooting began, and there were 4 Hotchkiss guns that were situated on high points. And they began raking the field. And they pursued the women and children who had fled for miles and miles. Because they were looked upon as ghost dancers, not just those that fled, but ghost. We were so demoralized. Where do we go? And finally, there was a Paiute man in Nevada named Vavoka, who was given a vision, and he instituted the ghost dance. And he said, for all of those that came to visit with him and those that taught him, he said, you all dance for 5 days, 4 or 5 days, and keep dancing. He said, and at some point in time, he said, you're going to sort of fly up in the air, and there's going to come this flood of mud, water and mud, and it's going to cover all of the non-Indians. And when it starts, all of those Anglo people are. And because Bigfoot's band were ghost dancers that had to be suppressed, they were killed. And to add insult to murder, 20 Congressional Medals of Honor were awarded to those soldiers then. 20 medals of honor. Quite a few more than are awarded at other such situations. And there have been those of the Congress who have attempted to introduce into the United States Congress an act called Remove the Stain. Remove the Stain, which the first time got tied up in committee, never came out of the budget for the military. And so now there have been some congressional leaders who have asked President Biden to revoke those medals of honor. Another apology that is due. There have been, I guess I should stop in the middle of the country and talk about the Pueblo. But the thing that I really want to say about the Pueblo is that in the year 1680, they ran all the Spaniards back south, out of their territories. And those Spaniards, who were cruel to the Pueblo, sometimes cut off their feet and the other body parts. But the Pueblo, in the Pueblo Revolt of 1890, ran those Spaniards who initially claimed this part of the world back away. And they remained absent from this land and for 12 years, and then they returned. There have been massacres. The Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, the Cheyenne people, followed 4 years later by the Battle of the Washita. To a peace-loving peoples who have loved and lived with this land for all time, who did not realize initially that they had a so-called immigrant problem. The kind of immigrant situation that, again, we are dealing with today. But we have survived. We number in the millions, 2 million or so, some intermarried with other races. We continue to maintain our ceremonies. We still go into the sweat lodge to cleanse ourselves physically, spiritually, mentally. We have ceremonies that will, through which we seek good health in body, mind, and spirit, where we also seek direction in life, where we give prayers of thanksgiving and bring blessings to the people. Many people still go to fast at Bear Butte. We go to our sacred places like Bear Butte to say our prayers, to make our offerings, renew our identities, and to pray for all people and all life. We continue to be a spiritual people. There are some that do follow the Christian faith, became Christians. Those lands that the Europeans could inhabit so long as they were not Christian, and we weren't. We make food offerings. We use cedar in our ceremonies. We go to those sacred mountains to tie our prayer cloth, to cleanse the people, the same cloths for which I am made. Prayer cloth. So it has been a distinct honor for me to visit with you today, to share with you my observations of what has happened on this earth. And I wish you continued good health, happiness, long life, and the ability to think with both the mind and the heart as you walk into tomorrow. Thank you.
Henrietta, thank you so much. I'm profoundly moved by your compassion with which you told the story of such deep suffering. And I just want to acknowledge you, and on behalf of our entire global Humanity Rising community, just express deep reverence and respect for you and the native populations in North America. There's been a very active discussion in the chat as people have been responding to your words and your stories and your deep wisdom. So I just want to acknowledge that in the first instance. And I think, where I'd like to begin our discussion is to have you say more about, the ghost dance and how the various tribes drew the strength necessary to simply endure for so long and keep intact the spiritual tradition that was necessary for their survival. Would love to have you say a little bit more about that. How did the Cheyenne do it? As opposed to the Lakotas was, I'm sure some were more successful than others along the way. But share with us whatever you would like to say about that domain.
Jackson Wilson, as he was called, or Jack Wilson, had been brought up in a non-Indian family. Apparently, there was an almanac there, and supposedly it also anticipated an eclipse of the sun, and it coincided with his falling into a deep state as if he were dead. And he came back and said he had a vision of going and he saw the white man's God, and he was told to come back to dance 4 days, and he was told that he was to spread this message across the mountains to the east and throughout the country. And there were many that heard about this man who did the ghost dance. There were some that did not participate in the ghost dance because of certain views they hold of the dead, among them the Dene or the Navajo people. But we went, the Plains Indian people went, and of course we had certainly suffered along with the other people. And so they were given this hope of a new world, a restored world in which only they would once again be living. And so there were those that, and he would give them gifts of feather, usually, and some red earth paint. And one has to understand that for many of our indigenous nations in some of our ceremonies, even for us as Cheyennes, this red earth paint is very sacred. We call it ma'o, sacred red earth paint. And so Bavoka would give them gifts of this red paint, give them a feather, and demonstrated one day that there was some clothing hung on the clothesline, and he took a gun and shot through it and made no holes. The velocity of the bullet just kind of pushed it aside, and that was it. And then there's some that interpreted that particular demonstration of power as clothing being impenetrable to bullets. And so the Lakota was their nation, made up of several nations, certainly embraced this. It gave us hope in a very, very, I don't know what I can say other than sad point in our lives, where we were being treated as obstacles to the concept of manifest destiny, territorial expansion, imperialism, name it. And so we needed that hope. We wanted to dance. After our experience, we wanted to dance those that had found our country away. Maybe into oblivion, but maybe back from where they came. So that it provided that hope for us. We needed it. The world had just crumbled around us. Mm. We were the destitute ones. We were divested of our land through treaties, through policy, such as homesteading, the General Allotment Act. General Allotment Act, through that alone, we lost 90 million acres of land. land. And today, I don't see what we have always been referred to as the vanishing American. We were supposed to vanish because of manifest destiny. But we continue to hold on to the ceremonies and the dances and the teachings, spiritual teachings that each of our nations had been given. They've survived until today. They will survive far into the future. We have very strong spiritual lives. And I have heard some people describe us as those who can forgive the unforgivable.
Mm.
But we were planted in this earth to lead good and happy lives, but to protect this earth mother or grandmother of ours, to live in humility with her, to make sure that she's not violated. And even though we continue to observe what we call world renewal ceremonies, and among some of our nations, or ceremonial ways of living, or spiritual ways of praying, of death, we're still facing the threat of global warming and fires that we have seen that will further damage this earth mother, this grandmother of fires. I still go and sit with those as they dance in ceremony to renew the world and all its peoples every year around the solstice in June or July. We have that strength of being a deeply rooted spiritual people with roots in this earth. And we continue to observe the teachings that our ancestors were given. That provided them with the strength and the means to survive generations upon generations prior to Anglo contact, and to survive generations and generations following contact. And our ceremonies will ensure our longevity as First Nations peoples. And it's just not our ceremonies. It's how we relate and interrelate to one another. Why does it always have to be with the anger? Not always has to be, but why does it? Why are we an angry people? Aren't we supposed to be loving and kind and respectful?
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we supposed to help one another? To recognize that we are all human. Our bodies physically are the same blood that flows through our veins as lands. First peoples flows through the veins of those that came to live on this land, unfortunately, to take it. We are related. We live in an interdependent world. And it is going to take all of us together to maintain the sanctity of this world, this earth, and all its peoples. That for us requires spiritual rootedness and prayer.
You know, it's interesting, Henrietta, that Connie and Andrew just put something in the chat that underscores what you just said. They say that the principles found in indigenous thought, the way of life of the native peoples of the Americas, and the essence of most tribal or traditional cultures throughout the world are principles which resonate to the deepest aspirations of all of humanity and can thus be thought of as pan-indigenousness, the common thread that ties the heart of humanity together in a vision of a world in balance. And that's an interesting notion, that what is emanating out of the indigenous peoples is the very tonality or frequency that all of humanity now needs to embrace. And that must be one of the supreme ironies of all of human history, that the very peoples that were subjected to the most intense genocide by cultures that had forgotten their connection with nature have not only endured through the ghost dance and the sun dance and all the ceremonies, but now have become the wisdom teachers for a humanity that's very deeply lost. And that, in fact, the spirituality that we need to collectively embrace is essentially, as Connie and Andrew are saying, sort of a pan-indigenousness that is going to see us through. What would be your comment on that?
Of course, I would agree with you. You have said it so beautifully yourself with prayerful thinking. We all need to recognize that it is going to take the entire community of Earth to save us. And to make sure that in doing this, that we think not only with the mind, but we think with the heart. Heart-line thinking goes both directions. It's so important, especially in teaching our young people today. I am one of the master teachers, a handful of master teachers of the Cheyenne language. I have about a dozen language apprentices. And I teach them culture within the context of language, or culture using language. And I tell them that, first of all, I know we live in a different time, which stresses a great deal of thinking with the mind. But we have to think with the heart, and be compassionate, respectful, loving, cooperative individuals. That's who we are as human beings. That is what our ancestors, our beloved ancestors, continue to pass down from one generation to the next. And we need to all be those teachers who teach our children and our grandchildren well, so that they too might live.
Yes, through language that culture is kept alive, and the extinguishment of language really extinguishes a cultural meme. So that's an extraordinary thing that you're doing in your elderhood, is keeping the Cheyenne language alive. That's a beautiful thing, Henrietta. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And in closing, I would love to just touch on that. In the Cheyenne language, what's the Cheyenne word for love, for example? What in the Cheyenne language for love, what is the connotation that is unique to that particular word?
When we look at love, we would say melts. That's love as sort of as a noun. But we always say nimelts. I love you. Or I love all of you. There, I guess if you tried to break it up into nouns and pronouns, I do that, but no, it's just love. It's just the word for love. It is. And that is what my apprentices tell me at the end of every class period. They tell me, I love you. And I tell them in return, Nahapa, I also love all of you. Nahapa, which is what I would say to all of you out there, wherever you are. I love all of you.
Thank you, Henrietta. That's a perfect note, everyone, with which to close. Love is an embrace of the whole other. That is pan-indigenousness. And that is the spirit that Henrietta has embodied for us today, and the spirit that will enable all of humanity to come together as one. So Henrietta, deep thanks, deep reverence, deep respect for who you've been in your life, in the light that you've shined on our community today. We're very, very deeply grateful. So thank you, everyone. That'll bring our session to a close for today. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box that Stan has just put in. You're welcome to the after session, and we'll see everyone then again tomorrow for our next session of Humanity Rising, as we deepen our exploration of the deep necessity for apology and forgiveness and reparations in our world. Many thanks, Henrietta.